Well, welcome everybody. We're going to be looking at, again, like Rachel said, Power Map today. It's one of the latest Power BI tools, or really one of the latest data presentation tools offered by Microsoft. It's actually still in beta, so I can imagine why many of you probably don't have it as part of your reporting solution yet. You're probably kind of working towards that or experimenting with it a little bit. But I hope to show you some of the new things that have come out with Power Map within the last month. Maybe about a month, a little bit less than a month ago, they had a new release, and in that new release there were some added features that I'll be happy to show you guys today. So again, what we're talking about today is touring data with Power Map, and the reason I titled the session that way is because really you are creating tours of your data, and that's part of the process of using Power Map. So let's kind of walk through that here. A little bit about myself first. I'm the training director at Pragmatic Works. I recently was awarded the SQL Server MVP, so I got that going on for me. And I've authored several SQL Server books, and I also run the local user group in Jacksonville. I also blog at a website called BIDN.com. That's the Business Intelligence Development Network. Okay. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about myself because I got a lot of things to show you today. Now, this session I mentioned that is kind of quick. There's some short things to show here, so I will have some time for questions at the end. I'll keep in mind whenever we get to those questions that this is a product that's not GA released yet. It's not officially released yet, so there are going to be some things that you'll probably see change as it goes on. And luckily, the benefit of how Power Map works is it's an add-in for Excel, specifically Excel 2013. And because it's an add-in, you can get updates more frequently. I think you'll eventually see this baked into the Excel product, probably the next release of Excel, but for the time being it's an add-in, and we actually get a little bit of a benefit from that. We get a lot of features that are added on more frequently. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of an overview of Power Map. Why would you use the tool, first of all? What benefits am I going to get from using the tool? Then we'll actually go through the development of creating a reporting solution with Power Map. So we'll talk about linking geographical fields to Power Map. So Power Map is all about maps, right? It's all about geographical data. So we're going to go through the steps of taking geographical data that you have and mapping it to that three-dimensional map. Then we're going to look at actually bringing in time data. This is one of the great things about Power Map is not only is it going to give you a map of your data, but it's also going to allow you to see that data across time. So if I want to be able to see how the crime in Jacksonville, Florida has been from 1980 to 2013, I would be able to see the progression of crime data inside Jacksonville for that time period. And I can actually create a tour where I can look across multiple cities and see all that information in a nice, well, basically like a movie that you create. Then finally, that's that last portion there, creating a Power Map tour. That's where you're basically creating a movie for your users. And in fact, you can export Power Map solutions or Power Map tours into an MP4 file, so they can actually watch those as videos. So you can create videos of your data, and that's really the one problem if you get anything out of Power Map that you're not happy with. This is probably the one thing that they're working really hard on is creating a good export story. And I think they've actually started to make a good path for that. Right now, the only export option that you have either is you view it in Excel, which is one way, or you actually export the tour that you create, or movie basically, into an MP4 file. And once you export it to an MP4 file, of course, you can use different kind of video editors to add sound to it, music if you want to it, audio explaining what they're seeing, that sort of thing. You have a lot of flexibility there. All right, so let's start off here, talk in general about Power Map, get a little bit of an overview, and even before then, let's talk about probably a really obvious statement here of, why would you, how's the best way to visualize geospatial data? I think I actually took this slide from one of my friends, Jason Thomas. I thought it represented the question really well. I could look at geographical data either on the left-hand side in the tabular format, or I could look at it in a much more visual format on the right-hand side, which is what you see Power Map. So mapping is a very powerful way of visualizing geographical data, and I think it's pretty clear to most of you why having kind of mapping tool like this is important, but just in case it wasn't, I got one slide there to kind of describe that. Obviously, the right-hand side there tells a much better story. All right, so a little bit about Power Map here. Basically, what Power Map does for you is it creates a three-dimensional visualization tool, a mapping tool, that's inside of Excel 2013. It's only Excel 2013. There's no add-in for 2010. So sorry, folks that are 2010 users, you can't do Power Map in 2010. It is an add-in, so you do have to go and you have to download it, and it is currently still in preview mode. So if you go and you download it, you'll notice it says preview. It's not officially released yet. It's very clear what it's going to do. It's going to take geographical data, it's going to map it to a map, and it's a three-dimensional map that uses Bing. So having said that, knowing that it uses Bing, you'll know that you also need to have internet to do Power Map. So if you're not connected to the internet whenever you're trying to create a mapping solution, it won't be able to create that solution for you because it's got to reach out to the internet to pull back the map results. Okay? And then finally, I've mentioned this a couple times, you can create tours, or basically like movies, and share it with others. Okay? All right, so let's talk about linking geographical data with Power Maps. You have several different levels or several different granularities of geographical data that you can link in Power Map. You can obviously here they have lat long, you have city, country, county, state, province, street, zip, and even address. So it can go down to the address level, and which a lot of you probably do have address level information about your customers. You can easily bring any of these different variations of geographical types into Power Map. And they've actually made some improvements on linking those geographical types to your reporting solution. They've made it a lot more seamless. That's the first step whenever you go to create a Power Map solution, is identify what the geographical type is and what the field is that is being pulled in from. Okay? The other popular thing to do is, of course, animate the data across time. I want to be able to see my data, my geographical data, across time in this map that we've created. So what this allows you to do is you pick a date field. It does have to be a date data type. Okay, so it can't just be a year that's an integer value. It actually needs to be a date. And once you pick that date, you can actually animate your map across time. So you can see, like I mentioned earlier, an example where I have crime data that changes across time, and I want to be able to visualize that. And you're actually going to see an example of that here in a few moments as well. Now, as far as the time settings, you do have some flexibility there where you can tell it how do you want to show the data across time. For example, if you think about data across time on a map, do I want to show an instant point? So the point at which that value occurred on the map, do I only want to show it that one point and then make it disappear? Or do I want to make it time accumulated, meaning as more and more data appears for that data point, do I want to grow my bubble chart, for example? So I could have a bubble chart on a lat long point and have that bubble chart grow larger and larger if I do time accumulated, whereas instant would just show a flash of a dot kind of thing. Persist to last is always going to show the very last value. So if you're an analysis services person, this would kind of be like last not empty. It's always going to show the last value that I have at the date that we're looking at. Okay, now they make it really easy to manipulate the date fields. You can actually speed up the time. So as you're animating the time across the map, they've made it very flexible to speed up the playback. So whenever your users are viewing it, they don't have to wait for the first 10 years worth of data to get to where the meat of the data is. So let's say you have 20 years worth of data. In the first 10 years, there's not a whole lot of activity, but the last 10 years is where the most activity occurs. And you actually have some flexibility to create ranges and tell it that I want to filter down to the last 10 years or maybe even the last 2 years to see where the most activity occurs. And then you also have, like I said, the ability to speed up or slow down the animation of that data. And again, I'll show you all these things as we get into demo here in a few moments. All right, so when you're ready to create a tour, again, a tour is kind of like a movie. You're really bringing the map to life. So it's not just putting data points on a map, you're actually bringing it to life where you can see different locations on your map and highlight different things about the data in those locations. So for example, if I wanted to look at crime data in Jacksonville again, and I wanted to look at the crime data in Jacksonville from 2009 to 2010 where it was really had a lot of problems, I can focus in on that area of the map, and then when that time or that duration goes through, that 2009 to 2011 goes past, I can take my tour to another part of the map. I can take it to Los Angeles, and let's look at the crime data in Los Angeles. And then I can jump to another part of the map, and that's kind of what a tour is. You're creating different scenes. So you're creating multiple scenes on a map, or think about scenes of a movie, and you're pulling them together into what's called a tour. So a tour is just a collection of scenes, and you can really have some flexibility with how each of those different scenes are made. You know, you can have one scene that focuses on one area of the country, and it also has a different way that it's visualizing the data. You can have one that shows a bubble chart and one that shows a heat map, and you can kind of mix them together in multiple scenes. It's really flexible with how you do that. You can also name scenes as well. So I mentioned Los Angeles and Jacksonville, maybe Chicago. You can name each of the scenes so that whenever it comes up to the users, it actually is very clear to them on what they're looking at. So I mentioned I'm going to show you some of the new things with PowerMap today that have been updated just within the last month. A couple of those new things are, I just wanted to highlight them here on a slide, is there was some quirky bugs with the original releases of PowerMap, the original previews, in that if you had data inside Power Pivot, you could not show it on PowerMap if it was a hidden column or a calculated field. Well, if that confused you, don't worry about it. That's not a requirement anymore. You can actually fix that problem. So calculated fields and hidden columns can be consumed from Power Pivot. The reason I bring that up here, though, is if you're running an older version of PowerMap, you may want to go look at the latest update because they do really update it about once every 1 to 2 months. And they're doing that with all of the Power BI tools right now as they're still in preview mode. You're seeing that you can download the previews very quickly. Other enhancements that you'll see here, one of them that is very popular is regions. You'll actually see regions here as an example of regions here in the bottom right. Regions is basically like highlighting geopolitical boundaries. And you'll see that especially useful in the States, mainly because the United States doesn't change geopolitical boundaries very often. But places in other parts of the world have geopolitical changes quite frequently. So you'll see that this is going to be very effective in the United States. Other parts of the country or other parts of the world, maybe not as much. But they do have that regions feature now that's been added in here. Oops, sorry guys. All right. So the other piece here is the export to video. I mentioned you now have the capabilities of exporting to a video. That's an MP4 file, so you can create a tour. Create that tour. Whenever you go to play that tour, you can also export it so it's an MP4 file that you can share with others. There's also a little bit of an improved startup experience. So when we go to actually start creating a Power Map solution, they've made it a little easier to get started. And you also have the ability to do things like customize different color layers. So right now you're looking in the bottom right. You see my map here has a particular color that it picked on its own. I had the flexibility to change these different color settings, and I'll show you that here in our demonstration in a few moments. All right, so we are ready for demo already. And again, this is a short demonstration here. Power Map really isn't super difficult to get your hands on or get a hold of, but it's something you want to play with. You'll get comfortable with it. The more you work with it, the better you'll get at it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start by pulling in, and really I'm going to introduce you to my data source first, but we'll start to pull in that geographical data into Power Map. We'll apply a time filter, so we'll actually put time across our Power Map solution, and then we'll create a tour, and then finally I'll show you the export capabilities of Power Map. Okay? All right, so of course we're going to be working in Excel. Very quickly here, I'm going to launch my Zoom tool. I should have already had that open. My mistake. There we go. Easy enough. All right, so I have Excel open over here, and I'm going to introduce you to my data source. You may be able to tell pretty quickly what my data source is just by looking at some of the names over here. I'm actually looking at election data. So we'll be looking at election data, specifically presidential election data. And we're going to be mapping this onto Power Map. So we'll use Power Map, and we'll take data from presidential election data, and we'll pull it together so that we can visualize it kind of like some of those typical news organizations do, like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC. They always have that political map where you can see each of the political parties and how the election results have gone. So we're going to kind of simulate something like that, and we'll highlight certain areas of the country that we want to focus in on and kind of take a look at what we can do with that. All right, so what I have here, again, as I'm using a Power Pivot data source, I have Power Pivot that has all my election results in it, and it's all the election results for the last, really every presidential election from beginning. Okay, so you'll see that I have election results all the way back from 1828 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch Power Map. Again, Power Map is an add-in for Excel 2013, so once you go download and install it, you'll see a Power Map add-in that appears here. in the very top section here under the Insert menu. So I'm under the Insert menu here, which is kind of off screen. Over here is the Insert menu, and then I would select Power Map. Now, if you don't see the Power Map option, just because you've downloaded and installed it doesn't mean that it necessarily shows it inside of your Excel interface. So if for some reason you don't see Power Map, you need to go enable the feature, and you do that by going underneath the File menu and going underneath Options. And underneath the Options menu, we're going to go to Add-ins. Now underneath add-ins, I know this is a lot of steps here, but you've probably seen us show this in many of webinars in the past. If I wanted to actually be able to select and turn on this add-in, I would come down to the bottom here where it says Manage and select COM add-ins and hit Go. And all I need to do is make sure that the Power Map add-in is checked off. Okay? This is if you don't see it. If you already see Power Map inside your Insert menu, then you're good to go. So again, underneath my Insert menu, I would select Power Map, and I'm going to tell it that I want to launch Power Map. Okay. Now you can see I've already created a couple different solutions here with Power Map, but I'm going to create a new one here together with you guys so we can start from scratch. So I'll create a new tour. Again, keep in mind tour is kind of like a collection of scenes. It can be one scene or it can be 10 scenes. And once I launch Power Map, it's going to start me off with this blank design surface. Okay. With a 3D map that you can see here. Now across GoToMeeting, I'm sure there's going to be a little lag here and there, but notice what I can do here with Power Map. It's very touch friendly. I'm actually using my touch screen here to do this. You can do zoom in, zoom out just like you would with other tools. You could use the mouse as well. And you can notice that there's a lot of flexibility here. It's very smooth with how it moves around inside Power Map. Again, it is using Bing, so you do have to have an internet connection if you plan on interacting with Power Map here. Okay. Now, a couple other things that they've added in the latest release is if you don't like this 3D globe like you see here, if you don't care for the 3D globe visualization like you see on my screen now, you do now have the capabilities of doing what's called a flat map, which is a typical map that you would see anywhere else. So if I select this flat map option up here in the top, it'll convert this 3D globe into a flat map. It actually does it pretty nice. And you can still zoom in and zoom out. It just is not in a 3D layer like we saw a moment ago. So that's one new button they've added in the latest release is the flat map option. Okay. Now, there's a lot of other things that we're going to talk about throughout our session here on the top, but I'm going to start off by actually getting us some data that we can use inside of our solution here. So again, we're looking at election data and specifically United States election data. So I'm going to zoom in on the United States here. And I'm going to go over to my data set here on the far right. Now you'll notice it's already found some data for me because this data was inside my Power Pivot model. And just by the fact I had it inside Power Pivot, it thought that I may want to use it inside of Power Map. So it's already kind of connected the two for me. I didn't have to do anything extra for that. Now as I scroll down here, you'll see there is lat-long is in here, so I could get down to the latitude and longitude, but we really wanted to kind of visualize inside Power Map like those news organizations do, like Fox News and MSNBC and CNN does. And to do that, really I need to get a state in here because I want to be able to visualize the different regions and the geopolitical boundaries of those states. So I'm going to check off state in the bottom right. And you'll notice when I check off state, it actually has already started to map out those states just by a little dot on top of each of the maps there, or each of the states. Now to actually tell it that I want to use state as our mapping granularity, I would hit this next button in the bottom right. So in the bottom right here you'll notice there's next. It's actually trying to map a property that's inside of Power Map. This is a property in Power Map to a column that I have inside of my data set. Okay, and you'll notice you can change the granularity here to something else if you needed to. You can change it to, if you wanted it to be at the zip code level, at the address level, you have the flexibility of changing that. But you'll notice it automatically found that just based purely on the column names here. All right, so I'll hit next, and it has now mapped the state/province property to my state name column that was inside my data set. And it did it to about a 96% match, meaning there's about 4% values inside my data set that it wasn't able to map out onto my solution here. So maybe I had something like Puerto Rico spelled differently or District of Columbia kind of spelled funny on here. it probably was not able to map those out. So there may have been some spelling mistakes or data problems. It's just a little variance there with what it was able to map out onto my Bing map to what's in my data set. 96% will do me here. Looks like it got all of the continental United States as well as Alaska, and I think if I go over here I'd find Hawaii as well. But here's what I'd like to do differently on this here. Is rather than mapping this as a little dot that you see here, I'd rather map this as more of a region. I want to see the state itself kind of outlined so I can see how the state did overall. And you have the capability of doing that, again, now with the latest release of Power Map that came out last month. I can change the type that's used. Rather than being a column type right here, I can change it from a column type to a region type. Region is that new feature I mentioned a moment ago. You also have bubble and heat map. You can see those here as a bubble is literally like a bubble chart on top of a map. Or a heat map. I'll show you that one a little bit later. But let's go ahead and I'm going to pick region here, and you'll notice what that does when I select region is it maps out each of the regions that were based on that geographical granularity I selected, which was state. Okay, so I can see each of my states are kind of mapped out here. I can see Hawaii and Alaska also mapped out. I'll try not to move around too much because I'm sure it doesn't come across very well through GoToWebinar. But I can see each of those different data sets shown here, or each of those different locations showed, and now I can start to put other data to this. So for example, if I wanted to see something like the votes that people received, I can add in votes, and I can see that it is aggregating up the total votes that I had across the country. Looks like California has had the most votes of all time. I can see it looks like also New York has had quite a few votes of all time. You'll notice as I highlight on top of these different regions that it actually returns back a value for me. So I can see in the state of New York, I've had 162 million votes all time. So this is across the entire history of the country, or presidential elections, I should say. So you'll notice this little layer here in the top here is a little distracting, and I'm pretty clear on what I have on this map. I already know this is an election map, so if I wanted to, I can remove this legend just to make it a little easier to view here. The other thing I can do here is make this a little bit more interesting, where if I wanted to be able to see which of the political parties won different states. So right now I'm just seeing total votes across all states, but if I wanted to be able to map this to a political party, I can come into my data set here and I can see that I have a political party table, and I can select the party name, and you'll notice it actually splits it up here and visualizes who typically wins each state. So it looks like the red, I'm going to assume that the red probably represents Democrats, just as a guess, and green here is probably representing Republicans. Well, I'm sure many of you have seen news organizations, and they never represent Democrats and Republicans by those two colors. They always represent them by Democrats as blue, Republicans as red. So if I want to be able to change how they're categorized here, or at least how the colors categorized, I can come up to the very top right and select the settings page here. Okay, this is a new feature as well, to have the capability of customizing the categorized colors. So I'll select the settings page here, and you'll notice here that I have the option to select a different category right here, and then pick what I want each of these the categories to be. So for example, if I can type in Democrat. Looks like it kind of took me to Democrat right here. And you'll notice Democrat right now is red. I want Democrat to be blue. And I want Republican. Type in Republican here. A little bit lower. Republican should be red. We know that. So I'm going to select red here. Okay. All right, so I can see that's applied it to my map. The blue now represents Democrats. The red now represents Republicans. Now, again, making no political statement here at all. This is just factual election results. Now, what I'd like to do, though, is make this where it's a little clearer. Because right now, you can see that it kind of has a little fuzzy or a less clear value for the red and the blue. I really don't really care about the shading. Because right now, it's trying to shade these and show me whatever the darkest result is, the darkest value that I have is where the most votes are occurring. But rather than doing shading, what I can do here on the bottom, you'll see there's an option here where you can actually change how the categorization is occurring. Right now, it's doing shading based on the values within a location. So it's shading on each of my categories within the location that it has, so within inside Florida specifically. I could also tell it that I want to do shading based on categories compared to other values. So compared to all the other values, meaning we should see if I change that option, we'll see some of them with dark blue and some of them with dark red. Now you can get even more granular than that. You can tell it that you want to shade based on a category, which is going with inside the political party, and say let's shade specifically with inside there. So that second option is more shading based on all the values. The third option is shading based on the category. So we should see more darker blue and more darker red here. Okay, so a few more darker blue and darker red. The last option is the one that I'm actually going to choose. If I'm trying to simulate what CNN would do, I would come down to the bottom here and select no shading. No shading just says return back the results. I don't care about shading these based on how many votes occurred. Okay. Now you'll notice here when I highlight on top of a state now, we get this really long tooltip that pops up, or hover over that pops up, that shows me all of the election results for every single political party. So it's a little bit too much to visualize here at once, so you may try and avoid that, or what I really need to do is go change my data model so that it doesn't show all of the political parties where there are 0 votes. No need to show 0 vote political parties. Okay. So we're able to kind of create a nice little visualization here. You can still move around it, it's still interactive. You can zoom in, zoom out still. But I want to take this to the next level. Really what I want to do is I want to be able to see this across time. I want to be able to see across all of the time that we've been doing presidential elections how the election results have occurred across time. And we'll see if we can make any kind of discoveries about the data that we wouldn't have thought about before. So to do that, I'm going to scroll down to where I have my year table here. And because presidential elections are done every 4 years, so this is kind of granular at the year level here. And I'm going to select the full year column. Okay. Now keep in mind, even though it says full year here, that's actually a date value. Okay, so you can't be just 2008. It has to be something like this, where I have January 1st, 2008. Okay, so if you're going to look at data across time, it has to be a date value inside PowerMap. Now you can kind of tell it some granularity options here if you wanted to. You'll see there's an option here where I can actually tell it that I'm looking at this as a year or as a month or whatever it may be. Okay. All right, so we're seeing data right now, and we're actually looking at data for the 2008 election. So this is the 2008 election. For some reason, we're kind of missing some value here. We'll take a look at that here in a few moments. But you'll notice what happens when I add in that time value. When I add in that time value for the year, I now have this new bar that opens up for me here in the bottom. And what this new bar does for me is it allows me to animate the data across time. And it's pretty obvious here how to do it. I would hit the play button, and it would allow me to see the data across time. So if I hit my play button here, you'll see some kind of interesting things about the data, and where we didn't have presidential elections on the West Coast for a while. And for some reason, that's strange, for some reason I'm actually missing a state here. I'm not sure why I'm missing a state. Typically that should show up without a problem. We can kind of take a look at another example I have where that's mapped just fine. I'm not sure why that one's not mapping. But it's interesting there that we were able to see, again I'll play it one more time, that no presidential elections were occurring before 1800s there on the West Coast, but as we had the Western movement, we had start to have presidential elections on the West Coast, and we can see how the West Coast really impacted our presidential elections. Okay. Again, I'm not sure why that one didn't map. If I looked at another one I had, it did map out just fine. Now, you may have noticed that that went really fast. As I hit the play button, it went through the results very quickly. The nice thing is you have some customizations that you can do there with when it plays. You can hit the little settings button here in the bottom. If I hit the settings button, I can tell it that I want to speed up or slow down the duration of my play axis here. You could also do some filtering. So you'll notice here in the bottom right, I can filter it and say I only want to show the results between this certain date range. Right now it's between 1824 and 2008. But if I wanted to, I could look at a specific time frame there. You also have the capability of changing a transition. There's a transition here where it allows you to actually visualize whenever you're playing a tour. It visualizes the map by doing things like hoverovers. Right now station just means it doesn't move. You can do a little figure 8. Think about like a figure 8 in ice skating. It's actually going to do that with like a camera view over the map there. Okay, so it's kind of interesting things you can do there. And then again, the duration, if I wanted to, I can increase the duration to something like 15 seconds here. Hit play, and you'll notice it goes a little bit slower now. So you can actually see what's going on here. Okay. So that's a little bit about the time settings here and actually mapping out time to it. Now, the other thing that we can do is have multiple layers to our map. Okay? So right now we have one layer on our map, and that one layer that we have is showing the presidential election results. But we have the capabilities of actually having multiple layers. So for example, if I wanted to be able to see the presidential election results also on top of something like the contributions. So contributions like donations to a campaign. So right before we did started our webinar here today, I actually went and I found another data source called opensecrets.org, and basically all it is it shows campaign results by year. Okay, so this website here is showing me each of the states' total contribution, the percent of that contribution that went to Democrats or Republicans, and I can look at each of the years here. You can see they have non-presidential elections in here as well. So I see 2012, 2008. I can switch to 2008. See California is obviously still at the top there. And 2002 wasn't really a presidential election. So you can see District of Columbia actually had the most contributions in 2002. It's interesting. But I'm going to use this website to really kind of see some more information about my data. Okay. So what I did is I used another Power BI tool called Power Query. Okay, so I'm going to go over to that here just for a moment and show you a little bit of what I did. I'm not going to go in depth to it because this isn't a Power Query session. But essentially what I did is I took this URL, I copied out this URL from this Open Secrets website. I went over to Power Query, which is another free add-in for Excel. Okay, another part of Power BI. By the way, I've done some Power Query sessions already, so if you go look at the past webinars for Pragmatic Works, you'll see that, that I did a pretty in-depth session on Power Query. But for my quick example here, what I want to do is I'm going to go pull data from the web, and I'm going to paste in this URL that has my campaign contributions. I'll hit OK, and it's going to pull in the results from that URL and see that there's a table inside that URL. Opened up on my other screen here. Here we go. And I can see that there's a table inside that web page called Contributions by State. And inside this Contributions by State, I see each of the states, the total contributions, and then the percent for each of these. Now, to spare you some time here, because this, again, is not a Power Query session, let me tell you a little bit of what I did to get this data in a format that we could use it. First of all, I wanted to be able to see how much total Democrats had and how much total Republicans had. Right now I just have a percent. I'm having to kind of deal with that percent. So I applied some transformations to the data and took that percent, multiplied it by the contributions to get how much each of Democrats and Republicans got. Okay? And then I also wanted to be able to see this across multiple years. Right now, we just happen to select 2000 data here. So I'm only seeing data for the year 2000. But I want to be able to see data from as many presidential elections as it will allow me. So I want to be able to see data for 2002, 2004, 2008, and 2012. So the way I did that through Power Query is I actually created a little function. And I'll briefly show you that here. Again, this isn't a Power Query session, so I'm not going to go in depth into it. But what I want to show you here is that I used a function inside Power Query. And what I did with that function is I asked and created a function that would allow me to pass in a year. So think of like a parameterized query. I parameterized this query and told it that I want to be able to pass in a year into this query by hitting this invoke button and give it the year 2000 or 2004, for example. So I feed in a year to it, hit OK, and it's going to return back results for that year. Now, rather than this being something that I have to do by hitting a button and invoking a query, what I prefer to do is actually make all this dynamic, and I'm going to loop over each one of those years. So how I did that, I actually have right here, I created a table of the years, and I can kind of walk you through how I did this. Because Power Query, this is one of my favorite new Power BI tools. Power Query allows you to kind of step through each of the transformations that you did. So what I did is I created a list of years. I filtered the years. Well, first of all, I converted the years to a number. Then I filtered the years to only show election years. Then I inserted a new custom column here, and what I did with this custom column was I passed in each of these years, in each one of the years, and returned back the results for each of the years. Then I brought back the results. So now I can see the year 2000. I can see the year 2004. I can see the year 2008. And I'm seeing the results for each state, for each year, by party, and seeing those results here very nicely and cleanly. And after applying several transformations, you can see on the far right here is all the transformations I've applied using Power Query. And I've eventually got to the results that look like this, where I have the year, I have the state, the political party, and the total contributions. So once I have that, I can now push that to my Power Pivot model. Okay, I've already done that. And I can bring that inside of Power Map. So here's how we can do this. I'm going to go back to Insert, and I'm going to launch Power Map again. Okay, and I'm actually going to show one that, for some reason, that the states were working just fine in this example I did before we started. I'm going to launch this one here. And what I've done is I've created a second layer, and I'm going to walk you through how I did that here. I'm going to kill that second layer, and I'm going to walk you through how I did it. So here's what we already saw once. We saw we can do the regions mapping, but we can also create multiple layers on top of each other. Okay, so we can see right here that I have one layer already created, but I'm going to create a new layer here. And this new layer is going to be based on my campaign contributions. So for example, what I'd like to see here is I want to map out my states. Okay, so I just mapped my states. You can see the little dot that appears on top of states. And I want to see this by campaign contributions. So I'll select contributions over here on the far right. And I'm going to kill this little legend here, just so it's a little easier to see. So I can see very clearly it looks like California, looks like Florida, and the Northeast so you donate the most money when it comes to campaign contributions. Texas is in there as well. Now that's nice, but I want to be able to see this by year, so I'm going to go ahead and check off year so that I can add this as part of my animated Power Map solution. Okay? So what I'm going to be able to see with this is the years that I have campaign contributions for, which is from 2000 to 2012. Whenever I go to animate this chart and hit play, you won't see the campaign contributions until about 2000 hits, where you can start to see those column charts appear. And I can see the most campaign contributions in certain areas. I could also do this like something like a heat chart. So if I want to do a heat map, for example, here, I could select heat map and make it show up as a little heat map here, which allows me to really see those contributions and show where they're appearing most. Now, heat maps are a little bit easier or better to visualize when you have a more granular level of your geographical type. So for example, if I had zip code or state or something like that, or zip code or city, that would be able to visualize here a little bit better. But it does show fairly well here still. Okay. All right, so I'm happy with that. I'll leave it as a heat map. And now what I'm going to show you guys how to do is create multiple scenes. So far all we've been doing is we've been working with a single scene. So what I can do is modify the scenes that we have. And really on the far right here is kind of your scene window. These are all the different scenes that we've created so far. And you can name this tour. Remember, a tour is a collection of scenes. So I can name this tour my election results. And I can name this particular scene by hitting the little settings icon here. And if I hit that settings icon, I can name this scene country or U.S. total U.S. Okay? I could speed up or slow down this particular scene. So if I wanted this scene to go a little slower, I could change the duration over here on the far right, just like we did before. And you'll notice now that when I change the name of the scene, the total U.S. does show up on the scene name here as well. All right, now let's focus in on some certain areas. So here's what I want to do is I want to focus in on, after I create a new scene, so I'm going to add a scene here in the top left. I want to focus in on a certain area. So we have one scene here called Total US. Now I'd like to create another scene that focuses in on certain areas of my map. So I'm going to zoom in on the Northeast. And I'm going to zoom in on the Northeast, and I'll actually call this scene, this new one, Northeast election results. Okay? And I can tell it, again, how fast do I want it to run, how slow do I want it to run. I could also do filtering on the dates as well. Now, let's create one more scene, because what I want to do with all three of these scenes is create a movie from it. So we're creating these multiple scenes, and then what we're going to do with it is show you how you can actually filter each of these scenes individually, where I can have one scene that shows a filtered results for a certain set of years, and my other scenes can show the entire duration. And where that would make sense is really on the West Coast, because think about my West Coast here. If I play this animation here, you'll notice the West Coast is completely empty for the first, half century here. So if I want to be able to filter down the results for my West Coast scene, I'll go ahead and name that here, West election results. I can come down to the bottom here now and filter this to an appropriate level. So I can say, all right, well, rather than starting in 1824, let's change this, and let's actually start in, let's say, the late 1890s. Okay, so let's start with something like 1850, hit play. That actually is a pretty good range here because it looks like I start to see states show up in that time frame. So I filtered down this one time frame to skip over all the years where I don't have election results and go directly where the data is relevant. So we've created these multiple scenes. Now let's show how this is pulled together. All these scenes together make a tour. Okay? And you'll notice up in the top here that we can now play a tour. Okay, so I can hit this play tour button, and when I hit play tour, it allows me to see each of those scenes built together. So this is my US view where I see all of the US sales. I assume not sales, election results. And once all those election results go by, once we make it into 2008, where my final election results are, it'll then move into the Northeast. I'm sure that shows not very well across GoToWebinar, but it's actually transitioned over there to my next scene, my Northeast one. Once it finishes showing my Northeast one, it's going to transition over to my West Coast. And again, notice that the time frame here in the top left started in the 1850s. So we got right to the election results we cared about. So very cool that you have the flexibility of maneuvering and having certain scenes show one thing and another kind of filter down to what you care about. A couple other things here that are worth viewing as far as Power Map goes. You have things like the themes, so I can change the different themes of my map. So you don't have to have a typical map view here if I wanted to. If I wanted to have more of a satellite view, I could change the theme here to a more satellite-looking view if I wanted to. So you have you have 8 different themes you can choose from here. You have this god-awful one. You have a lot of flexibility that you can change different themes. Probably the default one is the best, at least for what I'm doing here in this case. You can also apply labels. So you'll see here there's a map labels section. If I apply map labels, it'll apply labels down all the way to the city level. So I can zoom all the way down to my city and see my labels on each of my cities. Okay? One really cool thing that I like when you're trying to create this tour is you have this option here called Find Location. And what Find Location allows you to do is hop around to different places based on what you type in. So for example, if I was to create a new scene here, I'll add another scene in here. And if I did Find Location, what this allows me to do is I can type in a particular city. So if I type in something like Chicago and hit Find, it's going to take me to Chicago. And I can hit the labels here. And you'll see that indeed I am looking at Chicago. It is kind of large there, and having the region on top of it doesn't make it very easy to see, but it does allow me to kind of search through and find things I care about. So that is the Find Locations options there. We already saw this add layers. We actually added a layer here and saw how we could use that. So you guys have seen that as well. One other thing that's worth mentioning here is you have the ability to add little notes inside of your different scenes. So for example, if we wanted to add an annotation that shows our West Coast election results, I'm going to go actually and delete this scene here. There it goes. If I wanted to look at the West Coast election results here, the scene that we created earlier, and inside that West Coast election results, what I would like to do is make it so that I add a little annotation in here so that the user that's looking at my tour that I've created knows why I filtered down my data set. So I can right-click here, or even come up to the very top here and tell it that I want to insert a text box, and call this text box something like Note to User. No election results before 1850, something like that. And if I hit create, it's actually going to add this little note in here, and that note is specific to that scene. So if I were to go to play that scene, they would see that note in that one scene whenever they go to view it. So really cool, you can kind of add in little notes here and there. You can add in annotations as well to be able to focus your user's attention on certain areas. Now, that's it. Power Map isn't too difficult. I actually showed you just about, I'm trying to think if there's any features I missed. Really not. There's all these features that you have available to you, but it's made pretty simple. The one thing that I haven't shown you yet is the actual Create Video section, and I'll go ahead and click on this as I start to take questions here. But this Create Video here in the top will take each of these scenes, or in total our tour, and create a video out of it. So it'll ask me what kind of resolution do I want? Do I want 1080p, 720, or 360? And it's going to create what could be a high-definition video for you. So I could tell it I want to create. I'm going to do a 360p just because I want it to render this video pretty quickly. And I'll hit Create. Tell it where do I want to save this video. I'll put it in this special folder I have called Delete Later. Hit Save, and what it's doing right now, and Rachel, if you want to go and start queuing up questions as this is rendering, it's actually taking my tour that we created together, and it's rendering a video out of it. It's rendering it as an MP4 file, and then once I have that as an MP4 file, I can put that into any kind of video editor and add sound to it, add me talking and explaining what the results are. I have some flexibility there now that it's as an MP4 file. So that's really it for Power Map. Again, it's not a difficult tool, but it's a very impressive tool in what it can do. Oftentimes doesn't come across as nicely in a web meeting. But what I will do for you guys here, I'll put on my screen here my email, my blog, as well as my Twitter account. I do actually tweet quite a bit of new stuff with Power BI. So if you do Twitter, you should probably follow me. I do quite a bit of Power BI, blasting of new information that comes out whenever I see it. So. Rachel, do you have any questions queued up?
I do. How can we get versus 2013 Excel 2013 and Power Map for practice in a quick way?
Oh, okay, so it's trying to get ramped up on it. So if you're trying to get Excel 2013 and get Power Map so you can get try it out for yourself, you can download a trial. So there is a trial for not only Power Map, but there's also a trial for Office. So if you download the Office 2013 trial, you'll be able to experience this, and I think the trial is usually good for 180 days.
Great. Our next question is, do you think Microsoft will build in support for your own polygons using spatial data types like geometry or geography?
Yeah, I would imagine they probably would. Right now it doesn't do that. The one thing that may make me think they wouldn't do it is this particular tool is very much a power user or an end user tool. It's not necessarily designed for developers, but it wouldn't surprise me if they add in that capability because oftentimes even our own company, we have our own regions that entire our sales regions. So you may have your own kind of sales regions that you want to pull in here, and right now you don't have as much flexibility there to create your own sales regions, especially if you're splitting states and things like that. So yeah, I would imagine that would come. It's not there yet, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it. No news on that so far, though.
Okay. We would like to know, can I add my own map? I work for a city and would like to map a precinct or ward.
Gotcha. Okay. It kind of goes along with the last answer. You can't do it yet, but here's what I've seen people do: is they'll actually categorize within inside of let's say a zip code. So you can do zip codes. If your zip code or zip codes that are, multiple zip codes are part of a precinct, then you could actually pull that together. Now, if you're going more granular than a zip code, then it may be a little more difficult. But if I have multiple zip codes that are part of a precinct, for example, then I could actually, inside of a table, map each of those zip codes to a precinct and then use that precinct as a category, kind of like what we did where we did political parties. We did political parties across multiple states. You can kind of do that with precincts in that case. I would imagine a precinct is probably more granular than a zip code, though, so it may be a bad example.
Okay, great. Our next question is, does this only work for the United States geographic locations, or can we customize it based on other countries as well?
I believe they do have some other countries that they've started to get in there. It's a little bit more difficult, like I mentioned kind of early on. It's a little bit more difficult with other countries because some of the geopolitical boundaries outside of the United States move quite frequently. I believe some of the other countries are included, I'm not sure which ones aren't, I should say. So most of them, there's a lot of them in there. I'm not sure which ones aren't included. You will actually see if you bring in other countries that it'll map those out. But if you get really granular with borders and things like that, you may find that it's maybe a little bit off.
Okay, our next question is, what other kinds of charts are available for PowerMap? For example, are pie charts used?
Not pie charts. You can do. Here's what you can do. You can do heat maps. You can do column charts. You can do the regions thing that we showed, and then you can do bubble charts. So you got 4 options right now as far as the mapping of data. Bubble, pie chart. I'm sorry, not bubble. Not pie chart. You have bubble charts, heat maps, regions, and bar charts.
Okay, great. Our next question is the map interactive? Can a user click on a portion of the map and have a specific scene play?
Okay, that's an interesting one. It does not have that capability yet. So it's interactive in that you can move around and you can create a scene, but you can't click something on the map itself to kind of trigger a scene. So no capabilities there yet. That's an interesting one though. So these are good. This is actually really good stuff because you'll see again this is still in preview and they're looking for information like this. So I'm glad I'm hearing you guys ask about these kind of things because this will really help me when if I do talk to a Microsoft rep that I do occasionally on Power BI stuff. This is interesting stuff to see you guys are interested in. Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Okay. Our next question is, can we drill down to zip level from state level based on hierarchy level inside using Power Map only?
Okay. Power Map does not have the capabilities. Power View does. So if you do Power View, it has mapping capabilities in it, and it understands hierarchies where you can select a state and a city and a zip code, and you can kind of create a hierarchy out of it. Power View allows you to do that. Power Map does not have that drill through capabilities yet, and you really see that when my video is done, by the way. You really see that when it comes to, let me move my video out of the way, whenever you start the initial layer. So let me show this very briefly here. When I create an initial layer here, it asks me for a geographical level, and I can select region, or I can select state, but if I try and map both, it's going to force me to pick one or the other. Okay, so you'll notice that whenever I go to hit next, it won't allow me to select both. So, no, unfortunately, you have to have one level here. I can't select both of these, unfortunately.
Awesome. Our next question is, do you need an internet connection the whole time or only when you're designing?
Only when you're designing. So if you go to render that as a movie, or if you go to really, the only time you don't need an internet connection is after you do the export. So after you export it, you don't need it. But if you're interacting with it, if you're playing the tour, then you do need internet connection, yeah.
Okay. Does Power Map work with various data sources besides Excel and SQL Server, like Oracle and Teradata?
Yeah, so if you get the data in Excel, so the data has to be in Excel at some point. So once you get the data in Excel, it could come from Oracle, it could come from Teradata, it doesn't matter where the data is sourced from. Once you get it into Excel, then you can use it in Power Map. So at some point it has to get in Excel, which Excel has a variety of different ways that you can do a quick import of data into it.
Okay, awesome. We have a question that I can actually answer. Shocking, I know. The session will be posted on our website by tomorrow, so if you want to refer back to it, just check back by tomorrow under our Learning Center and under past webinars. Our next question is, let's go down to a zip +4.
That's interesting. I haven't tried zip +4. I believe it does recognize it, but I don't think if you select the mapping of a zip, so if I actually went to create another layer here, and I selected zip, which I don't have in this example, it's got to map to the property of a zip inside of Power Map. So again, whenever I selected state earlier, it's mapping my state column right here, that's my column, to a property inside of Power Map. If the property inside Power Map doesn't understand zip +4, which I don't believe it does, then it will not be able to map that.
Okay, awesome. Does this only support Bing Map, or can you use Google Map also?
Only Bing Map. Yeah, you're in Excel, so you're in Microsoft's world. No Bing, no
Google,
unfortunately.
They do not like it. Our last question so far, unless anyone sneaks one in, is, so we have to use a date field instead of a numeric value for an election year. but can we change the string formatting of the label at the top to only display the year?
Oh, okay, so the labeling of top here. No, it's still got to show, at least right now. I would imagine that's something that they'll probably make flexible as they continue with this tool. Again, it's still in preview, so you'll see a lot of enhancements. Right now, it's going to map up top there whatever you are seeing inside of the data field. So yeah, it's going to show an actual date value there, unfortunately.
Okay, perfect. That was our last question. So thank you, Devin, and thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, wait, someone just snuck one in. Do you want to do one more, Devin?
Sure, go ahead.
Is there a limit to the number of hits against Bing Map in a live environment?
I haven't seen anything yet. And you can, like I said earlier, you can go down to an address level, so you can go pretty granular. And I haven't seen any issues as far as number of hits against the Bing API. Probably because it's baked into the tool. They probably remove any kind of limitations that you would have. So yeah, no limits that I've seen thus far. And I've gone much more granular than state. I've actually put in lat long before and didn't have issues.
Okay, great. And we have one qualifying question with the last one I asked. It's, can you change the string format of the data field?
It has to be a date. So yeah, if you're trying to map it across time, it has to be a date value. So if you, however you format it, it has to eventually be converted to a date data type to be able to be used there.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Devin. It was an awesome session.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Join us for more free training on the T's every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern.